How you doing? Hello everyone and welcome back to the Educated Collins Snap channel. Today we've got a deck build guide for you. Played it a lot yesterday, had a lot of good fun, and I wanted to kind of showcase like deck builds. Usually struggle making decks because I feel like it has to beat everything, but had a lot of good success with it anyways, and just wanted to showcase what I've been playing with. So hopefully you guys enjoy it, and let's begin. I see why I don't make deck guides, because like 5 minutes into it, I'm like, well, this list doesn't beat every deck every single time. Is basically my idea. But we'll go through the list. I've been playing this list most of yesterday, a bit of today as well. Generally, it's been pretty good. Been climbing with it, so generally like what it does. We can go through all the cards individually, why they're in here. I guess some things I would say, just some things I would address. Maybe some replacements if I have them. Actually, I don't know if. I mean, I guess you don't need a couple of them, so I guess there's a couple. But we'll go one by one. First off, we have Snow Guard. So Snow Guard I think is really important right now, especially in the way this deck plays, because there's not that much early game in this deck. So what Snow Guard allows you to do is kind of like cheat the early game, since it's a 1-drop that gives you a 2-drop. And then sometimes you also play it on 3 if you need to. So it's just a card that if you get early, it just allows you to bridge the early game completely. And just has like good stats, good tempo. The effects, I wouldn't say the bear is that useful, but the hawk is definitely useful in a number of situations. So there's a lot of like power in this one card. Definitely a huge buff in Snow Guard. Made it playable, made it very good. Definitely a card you want to always consider, I guess, in a deck building, and it fits really well here. So it's just a early game piece that kind of bridges your early game, so that you don't like suffer too much. Because sometimes with this deck, right, you can only play a couple cards, especially if you're playing Electro. So Snow Guard lets you play a lot more in the early game. Then we have Daredevil. Daredevil is just good because it's really effective with a lot of the cards in here, especially Professor X and Alot or Alioth. Sometimes Aero does some work and whatever, but Shadow Carrier also sometimes it's decent, but mostly Professor X, Alioth, right? They kind of do the same thing. They just lock down a location in essence. So the Daredevil just allows you to kind of ramp in there and deal with whatever your opponent's going to play. One weakness of it is a 2/2. So in mirrors or so, right? Essentially, right? If they play a 2/3 or something, that could be like a big difference maker. Because one thing with the addition of Alioth is that priority actually matters now. Before, you were really just looking to lose priority. So Daredevil wasn't too big of an issue because you could just, Shang-Chi it back. But because of Alioth, you need priority to get it to really go off or do what you want. Having a 2/2 when your opponent's playing their 2/3 or a collector or something like that, right, it does feel kind of blah. So you do have to keep that in mind. But generally, its upsides are really high. And just, there's always that fear of snapping into a turn 5 Daredevil when you're not super behind, right? Sometimes people do that, and I'm like, there's no way you can win here. But in a lot of cases, that's not the case. So you can definitely cheese some people, get some value. So that's why it's in here. Just good synergy with a lot of the cards in here. Next up, we have Jeff. So Jeff is just, I feel like auto include level in a lot of decks, like in a lot of archetypes at least, where it just does so much. It's so flexible. It wins you games. It prevents your opponents from doing things they want to do, where it's like, okay, if I can lock them down here, or this location I lock, or they can't get into this, blah, 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 blah. Jeff says, yeah, no, I can get in there. It's not a problem. So it just helps you a lot. It's very flexible. It works well with Electro as well, since Jeff doesn't care about the mana restrictions. So you can just play Jeff after you play your card. Doesn't matter. So it's just really good in a deck like this. So it's hard to really state how good Jeff is. Like, if you don't have it yet, you've messed up, in my opinion. That you've had a lot of opportunities to get Jeff at this point, And if you just don't think it's worth it, well, then that's fine. But if you want it and you haven't got it, like, what are you doing, right? So definitely something to think about. Next up, we have Shadow King. I would say this is maybe not as important. And I have been messing around. Like, I'm still tweaking the deck, in my opinion. So you might, like, if I stream or something, you might see like a different version of this deck. Something I've been doing is adding Silk and seeing if just the 2 power is more important than the ability to reveal. But generally, like, this has been good for me. Generally, in 2 matchups, in the destroy matchup, it's pretty good, and in the Loki matchup, right? Like, there's a lot of hits there. So generally, that's the appeal for it. Sometimes you have to temper it on 2 because it's your only play, and that doesn't feel bad because it's a 2/3, or it's like you're playing Jeff, but it doesn't feel like, oh my god, I got super value. So you do have to be careful about it, but it's pretty cheap. Preferably, you want to do something like Shadow King Wave on turn 5 if that's what you need to do. Like, that's really powerful, But generally, still a good 2-drop. Pretty nice. Another thing I've been doing is comboing with this. This requires like really good foresight, so I don't expect people to be doing this. But you can Shadow King and then set it up where the Odin will be like a finaler. I've definitely caught some people off guard where they forget I can Odin the Shadow King, and then like, phew, that's definitely like a good play. I just think it requires a lot of setup, so you don't see it too often, but it's a really nice combo you can do. So this one I would say is not that important if you want to switch it out for something else. Scarlet Witch could be just as good or better in my opinion. So this one's iffy-ish to me. But yeah, been doing pretty well. Next up we have Electro. I would say Electro is like the whole engine in my opinion, because it lets you ramp, it lets you play the Sandman, lets you play all your cards, your Professor X early, it lets you play Alioth on 5, so the Daredevil works. Like it's just a really important engine piece. So if you are playing this deck, you do need the Electro. That's really how it functions. A lot of people are playing Galactus, so that is something to be aware of, in that you have to keep that in mind. And sometimes you're like, it's not relevant to Electro in particular. It's just like something I want to talk about. A lot of people are playing Galactus, right? So you have to keep that in mind. Aero helps a lot and things like that. So if they're waving you, right, you gotta be careful. Maybe the Doom isn't the best. Maybe Aero is better. Things like that. So you just have to keep those things in mind. But generally, Electro just lets your whole combo go off. And we do have like traditional Electro compositions with Doctor Doom Odin. I think some people are just going full Galactus, right? So they don't have Doctor Doom Odin, that kind of thing. But with this one, I don't have Galactus. But that doesn't mean that I would be playing it if I had it. So generally, I like the Doom. I think Doom's a really good card right now anyway. So it just works well. And Electro just gives you the engine. So I really think it's a nice piece, nice combo, and helps a lot. Now, I would say Wave Sandman kind of fulfill the same niche, except Wave is better. Honestly, think Sandman could use like a buff, but then again, it's a toxic card, so making it like very playable is a bit iffy. But I could see it for sure. But yeah, definitely Wave really strong, since you essentially get to go Wave into Doom mostly. Sometimes you'll go Wave into like Alioth, or Wave into X, Wave into Sandman, depending. But most of the time, you want to Wave into Doom. That's really where you get the most payoff, since you can finalize with the Odin. So it's just another way of ramping if you don't get the ramp. So three on Wave, then you play Doom essentially. Then you 5, you can play usually Aero. Sometimes you play Sandman, but usually Aero. And then you Odin finally, or Alioth, depending on what you need. So just a nice piece. You can also do it on 5 if you need to. If you don't have an early game, your early game's all your early game cards. So then turn 5 you can go 2 and a 3, or just Wave and then finish it off with whatever you need. So pretty good card, pretty effective in its job. So kind of does the job of Sandman, except more flexible, but only lasts 1 turn. But most of the time, 1 turn's really, if in the matchups, 1 turn's what matters. I'm gonna skip Professor X. I'm gonna go straight to Sandman. This is another card I'm probably iffy about. I honestly think it should have 4 base, because you can't contest Professor X, and Professor X is pretty large in the meta right now, and it just like feels off that I can't even use this to contest. Some of like I can't even contest sometimes like a Jeff or something, or a Wave, or whatever, like and it's like it's a 5 drop. Definitely think they were a little bit heavy-handed in the nerf. I do understand, because when Sandman was nerfed, it was super heavy prio. A lot of people were playing it, and then people are playing it ish. I wouldn't say people are playing it that much, but they're still playing it a little bit right now, so I can still see, and it can be a frustrating card. However, Loki can also be a frustrating card, and they let that go through. It's like, give me something to deal with Loki, because right now I wouldn't say Loki has the hardest matchups, right? I think Loki players can still do things even if they're in unfavorable positions, which is fine. Like, but not every deck has that opportunity to like win it in a tough matchup. Sometimes you play a card and you're like, well, I can't beat this at all. Low-key players, you never really feel that. So wouldn't mind if it got a power buff. Also wouldn't mind if it was like a 4/4, honestly. Like, I think that would be like okay. But that one I'm not gonna like fully defend. I do think a power buff would be nice, but I'm still running it. Still fits in the matchups that matter. You really have to go Electro Sandman. I don't really think you can play Sandman on turn 5 and it matters. A lot of times you need to shut them down turn 4. I mean turn 5 and 6 for it to really be effective, to really worth anything. But currently, it still does its job in a lot of matchups. Though a lot of people are playing more 5s than 6s, so it's not as the meta is evolving, right? Less Loki. I do think people are playing other things. So eventually it's gonna lose its slumber. Maybe by the time you're watching this, it's like you don't need it anymore. People already moved on. But yesterday it was working really really well. So definitely want to mention it here. Da-da-da-da. Next up, we have Aero. So I think Aero is like my tech-ish card. I think it works pretty good into the Galactus matchups. So you do have to be aware that they're gonna Galactus you, which is sometimes people just forget. Like, hey, they played Wave and a 1-drop or a 2-drop in the same lane. Like, what are they gonna do? They're gonna, they're gonna Galactus you. So you have to be a little bit careful about that. But generally, it's pretty good. Also, people just don't play around it, and I think that's fair because it's not a card that's super common. Honestly, I never see it actually against me too, so I never see it. Never mind, it's not common at all. So I always seem to catch me off guard. It's also good into like when people are Alioth setting up you, like trying to set up Alioth, you can just move it out the way. You have to have priority, right? So yeah, you just move the Alioth to the lane they're already winning, right? And that seems to catch people off guard. There's definitely ways to do this. It's also just generally good into some specific situations. So generally a good card. I've been decently happy with it. I've been testing, like I've been thinking. I haven't put it in, thinking about Hobgoblin as well. Like it also works for Galactus, right? And but it also baits that I'm playing Galactus, right? Which is the idea here, and then I can like do something else, right? Like that's, but hey, I'm still, that's like theoretical, so let's not really go into it. This has been working, so definitely fine. Then we have Alioth. Honestly, I probably have more to talk about this card than I'm going to. I do think it's definitely part of the meta. Definitely going to be played. This has some winning like ability to win potential that other cards can't really compete with. Where there are some board states that only this card can win. Like there's no other card in the game that could have won you here except for this, right? And that's always a strong power to have as a card where it's like only you can win this lane or win this scenario, right? Jeff has that same ability where only Jeff in some circumstances is the only card that could ever win you the lane here, things like that. Doctor Doom also has that in some scenarios. Shang-Chi has it. Like, these are the staple cards, the powerful cards that stand out. And Alioth has that potential. So it's definitely a card that people can grow to love or hate, depending on, how they view a card in the meta and things like that. But yeah, this card really, really powerful, locks down a lot, and definitely works really well in any type of lockdown list. Where Professor X we do have, right? So we can definitely lock it down. If you can win that Professor X lane, then you just have to win. Then you don't really have to win the other. You just have to make sure you have priority, essentially, right? Like, and that's not. It's not that easy, but like in a lot of circumstances, it's not as hard as you would think to just have priority in turn 5, turn 6. So crazy card, honestly. I think it. I just don't know if it's not balanced, right? Like what if I were to say some positives, what I like about this card is that it has kind of swapped the priority meta game, where before the meta game was always like be second, right? Always be second, because if you're second, then you can respond to things. You can say, oh, they're gonna do this, I will respond here. I get the last laugh on like Silk moving, and get the last laugh on Shang-Chi, Rogue, always get to respond, right? Surprise them. But now it's like, oh, do I have priority? Boom. Your play doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you do, you're dead. Yeah, and that's that's very powerful. So a lot of people have been playing a little bit more heavy priority, heavy pressure to make sure that they don't get cheesed by this. And still, this card is relatively new, so you still have people that just like forget it exists, right? Just like don't really play around it. Where in my opinion, it looks telegraphed, right? I'm playing the card, I'm like, this is so telegraphed. But then people are like, oh yeah, I forgot that this card exists, right? I do think as time passes that will be less relevant, but I do like the swap in the priority game, because going second every time, having priority, like winning the game, the whole game except for the last turns, like a bad, like that always felt wrong to me. So I'm kind of happy that you have some reason to be be on priority. So, but yeah, definitely a powerful card. I can definitely see it part of the meta moving forward, even with Mobius and everything coming out. I can still just see this being a staple. So yeah, definitely a crazy card. And the last two are just like ramp staples: Doctor Doom, Odin. Doctor Doom, so happy he got the buff back. It it felt so wrong to play this as a when it was summoning 4 power. Like it just really wasn't that enticing. But yeah, back to a 5, still good, still really strong, nice finisher. You can play this after wave, like a lot of good things going for Doom. So yeah, great card. Don't have too much to say about it because it's so good, it's so staple. And then Odin has a lot of purposes in this deck, honestly. Um, the best purpose is throwing back those hobgoblins that people throw at you. But honestly, like that is so annoying. But yeah, definitely you can follow it up with wave. I would say that's not as common because you have to wave on 4 essentially, right? So you're going wave on 4 and then Odin 5, right, to do that. But a lot of times you just wave and then Doom and then Odin, right? But you hit the Doom, right? That's super common, and you hit the Alioth. I think that's also super common. And then the other stuff is like pretty niche, right? The Aero, sometimes that matters in some circumstances, and then Shadow King like requires like super heavy setup. You have to basically know like what your opponent is going to do turn 2, which is kind of hard. So I wouldn't necessarily rely on that. But yeah, it has happened to me. I've definitely won some games because they weren't expecting it, and I think that's super fair. So, but yeah, this is my current list ish. I'm adjusting still, but definitely had a lot of good fun yesterday playing it. See what you like. I definitely think this type of deck will be more common for sure. Like Loki's still pretty good, but this has a pretty decent matchup into Loki. That's kind of the idea, where you can shut down kind of it. And honestly, I don't know. Like Loki still can fight this. Like it's not doomed. Like this isn't like a full Loki counter deck, right? Like as long as they play smart and they know exactly what I'm doing, I still think they can just like win. Yeah, but yeah, I do think Loki probably should have got nerfed more than the Collector. Like I feel like Collector didn't need to take the nerf. Like Loki should probably, because what happens is like people play multiple Lokis, or if you're in a Loki matchup, right? It's like who hit Loki more. And if Loki was like a 3/3 or something instead of a 3/5, then you can't just like spam Lokis and like win the game. Because right now you could kind of do that, like Loki into Loki into Loki in the mirror, right? It's like whoever plays a Loki first just like gets more Lokis, and then it's like 5 power base, so it's so much power too. It's like, wow. Anyways, I just wanted to talk about this deck list, just the idea, the playstyle. I don't really like doing deck lists too much because I basically feel like the deck has to beat everything, and that's not fair to decks in my opinion. Because like I played it yesterday, most of yesterday. I wasn't streaming, right? But I was just climbing pretty steadily. I do think people will adjust, right? So, you know, it might not have the same effect, and like in a week, right? Like the meta game is gonna be very different. So, like, you know, but generally, I just wanted to mention it, throw it out there, have a video, and let me know your thoughts if you tried, if you like it, and just your thoughts on. I mean, I already know your thoughts. Anyways, let me know. Take care. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one. Oh man.
Educatedcollins snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you to marvel snap. Your skills will be